Hello, and welcome to the 7th episode of Season 10 of the Dark Money Files, in which we shine a light into a murky world. I'm Ray Blake, and with me is my co-host friend and business partner, Graham Barrow. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ray.
Now, Graham, fund managers can have a really tricky time trying to make sure that when they onboard new investors, they don't onboard the wrong ones. But with each individual having multiple records across multiple jurisdictions, they open themselves up to potential fraud and reputational damage every time.
That's true, but with Cure, K-U-R-E, the new product from Deep Pool, global fund managers are enjoying a single, always-on system that consolidates information into a single investor record and updates those records whenever and wherever they change. We suggest you read up about it further at deep-pool.com.
Well, I certainly agree with that. Now, what are we talking about today, Graham?
Well, Ray, we promised our listeners we'd give them an overview of an extraordinary piece of work by Dan Neidle, who used to be a high-flying tax lawyer at one of the UK's Magic Circle law firms, until seeing the light and forming a not-for-profit called the Tax Policy Associates.
They're quite unusual for a campaigning organisation because they accept no donations, charge no fees, and don't do any commercial work.
No, so I guess, Ray, if you want to demonstrate complete independence, well, that's the way to go.
Well, yeah, but it does make you wonder how they finance themselves.
Yes, but then Mr. Neidle, in an interview with the Guardian newspaper back in June this year, when refusing to disclose just how much he was paid in his former life, said, and I'm quoting, "I'm embarrassed. I'm so embarrassed about how horribly overpaid I was that the only person who knows how much I was paid is my wife."
Well, fair enough then. His organisation campaigns across 3 key activities: providing expert and non-partisan tax advice, both in the UK and globally.
Yep, and analysing and investigating areas of tax policy which are or have been underreported.
Few of those, aren't there? And partnering with journalists, academics and others researching and investigating tax and tax policy.
Which is where we need to make a declaration of interest, as we are one of those other parties.
We are, but all we're going to do in this podcast is report on what Mr. Neidle and his organisation had to say.
Exactly.
And in the process, we're going to revisit the subject of mini umbrella companies, MUCs, which we've covered before, but not in this detail and with a very different point of view.
Well, exactly. One of the really interesting elements in Dan's reporting was the involvement of other expert services, not just banks and shell company formations.
No, we've got KCs, King's Counsels, still doesn't roll off the tongue.
No.
Barristers who've been recognised as having demonstrated exceptional ability.
It's kind of a benchmark of quality in the legal world, isn't it?
Well, yes, that's how it's popularly regarded. But we've also got the role of social media, loopholes in tax laws, and much else besides.
And I guess, Ray, the overarching message is that wherever you are in the world, there will always be people who look for an easy method to make money and who are prepared to utilise others to provide the veneer of respectability and legality in order to do so.
And are they better or worse than the other people who are prepared to be used in that way?
Well, that's a good question. Yeah, I think we'll see that some people have probably been used where they might not be expected to have the knowledge or understanding to be truly culpable.
Yeah, but there are others who probably should have known better and probably did.
Yes. Okay, so let's set the scene. Shall we tell the story?
Yes, let's. For some time now, at least since 2016, investigative journalists have been reporting on what are known as mini umbrella companies.
Mucks. And we explained much about mucks in episode 2 of season 9.
Exactly. But Dan went into great detail explaining that the network he wanted to look at numbered at least 10,000 companies, involved 10,000 different Filipinos, and somewhat fewer UK nationals acting as proxy directors and shareholders.
Yes, but what was new to me was the fact that the scheme had, at least in part, been based on the legal opinion provided by AKC, King's Counsel.
And at this point, most reports would have skirted around who exactly that KC might be.
But in this case, with a huge break from the traditional approach, Dan names the KC who provided the opinion.
Which I think is probably unprecedented.
Well, I think it is, yeah.
And presumably reinforces the belief that his opinion was completely flawed.
Well, according to Dan, other KCs who've seen that opinion have described it as, quotes, shocking, appalling, mind-blowing and completely irresponsible.
Strong words there, strong words. No sign of any of the 3 Ps so beloved of investigative reporters then?
Eh?
Well, possibly, potentially, or perhaps that they tend to cede in these allegations. The 3 great modifiers, I believe they're called.
Yes, I see, Ray. No, actually, there was no equivocation whatsoever.
Not even an allegedly.
No.
He must have been very confident in his position then.
As we will see.
Now, the story starts with the formation of thousands of companies which were used to employ, and I use the word in a loose sense, 1 or 2 workers as part of a bigger contract.
Yeah, so instead of them all being paid under one big umbrella company, they were paid through lots and lots of much smaller mini umbrella companies.
Exactly right. Now, the mucks would be placed at the end of a chain, starting with the employing company and moving through the main contractor and ending up with the mucks, which then paid the worker.
And that all sounds a bit contrived.
And that's really the point. It was contrived. Because on top of all that, shortly after incorporation, the muck would be transferred into the ownership of a named Filipino, who also became the sole director.
But how can someone who knows nothing about the business, the people being employed, or frankly anything else to do with the scheme, be deemed to be both the owner and controller of the participating company?
From what is very much the other side of the world. Yeah, absolutely. Good questions, Graham. Very good questions. You are on fire today.
Well, thank you. But what was the benefit of adding this level of complexity, Ray?
Well, 2 things. The flat rate VAT scheme and National Insurance Employment Allowance.
OK, how does that work then?
Well, both of these schemes offer tangible benefits by way of reduced VAT payments and reduced national insurance contributions.
OK, so you pay less of what is effectively a sales tax levied on your invoice total, and you receive rebates or reductions on the employment tax paid by most employed people.
Yeah, it's kind of like smurfing in reverse, isn't it, really, for tax benefit? And that difference wasn't passed on to the employee, of course, but retained by the muck.
And how much might that be?
Well, Dan estimates it to be a minimum of £5,000 per company per year.
And that comes to £50 million for 10,000 companies.
Yeah, but if the claims went up to the maximum allowable, Dan was being generous, the figure rises to 180 million a year.
Wow. And I know that Dan worked with other investigators who believe that the actual figure for mucks in this network is closer to 55,000 companies.
Yeah, and that would increase the loss of tax revenue at the cautious end of the estimate to 300 million and at the higher end to around £1 billion.
Blimey, that is not exactly chicken feed then, is it?
Well, they'd be very well-fed chickens if it were, Graham.
That is a foul joke, Ray.
Yeah.
Shall we move on?
We'll get letters about this. We do.
I know.
You know that.
I know. Well, if they come in volume, we'll just have to duck.
Now, you might want to know how you recruit 10,000 individual Filipino directors or shareholders.
I definitely want to know that, Ray.
Well, the answer to that, as to so many things these days that we don't fully understand, is social media.
Well, of course it is.
Yeah.
Any platform in particular?
Well, two main ones, YouTube and Facebook. The YouTube video linked with this scheme, accessible from Dan's report, which we'll link to in the episode blurb, is extremely professional and rather touchingly majors on the need for the applying Filipinos to have honesty and integrity.
Oh my.
Part 2 of the series looks in detail at the opinion provided by KC, and we'll name him, Giles Goodfellow.
Well, if Dan's named him, I don't think there's too much jeopardy in us following suit, is there? So why was it such a problem, Ray? I mean, was he an active participant in the fraud?
Well, no, not at all, Graham. And the report goes out of its way to say that they had no reason to believe Mr. Goodfellow knew that the implementation of the scheme was likely to be fraudulent.
OK, so what was the problem then?
Well, it was the failure to raise any red flags around the way the scheme was structured. He actually notes in his opinion that HMRC would find it difficult to recover unpaid tax from the Philippines, but then failed to note that this looked like the sole purpose of the scheme in the first place.
I also see he didn't raise a red flag around one of the questions he was asked, which was whether if the structure failed at the technical level, HMRC would be able to recover tax and prosecute for tax evasion.
Yeah, and that's a question that you're unlikely to ask unless you think that's a distinct possibility, surely.
I completely agree. And apparently Mr. Goodfellow was comfortable with the fact that the sole requirements for the Filipino directors or shareholders was that they speak English, have a mobile phone and email. And that they would be the ones ending up with the liability to HMRC if the structure failed.
Which is not nice for them, and a headache to recover for HMRC, even if they are all possessed of immaculate integrity.
A cynic might say that this was the whole point of the exercise.
Are you a cynic, Graham?
I'll leave that for others to work out.
Yeah, you're definitely a cynic.
Thank you.
And having then provided the opinion that the structures were not for the avoidance of tax, he failed to provide a single case study to back up that opinion, right?
OK, but if they weren't to avoid tax, what were they for?
Well, apparently his view was that each participant only had an eye on its own commercial profits.
But surely those profits were arising from a rather contrived tax arrangement.
Yeah, and only from that. And it's a very good point, Graham, and one that doesn't appear to have been addressed.
And the consequence of this is that the scheme was promoted aggressively and with some success given the scale of the operation.
It probably isn't an exaggeration to say that the opinion provided the foundations for the scheme to go ahead.
Yeah, and the bit we haven't covered yet is about the UK directors and that other bit of social media, Facebook.
And there is a bit of a sad element to this. It starts with someone, Dan's article followed a lady called Donna, inviting their friends and acquaintances to earn a quick 1,800 quid. Fully legit, no questions asked.
I bet that was popular.
Well, except with the Scots.
Why?
Well, because her post makes clear that they won't accept anyone from Scotland.
Why ever not?
You'd have to ask them. I've no idea. But even so, she had lots of replies.
Well, given all the economic issues we've had over the last few years, Ray, I'm really not surprised.
Exactly. People could become the director of up to 6 companies at a time and repeat that 4 times over.
So 24 companies in total?
Yeah, and once the company was going to participate as a muck, the ownership and control would pass out to the Philippines.
Fair enough, but nevertheless, Ray, their name and address was now stuck on Companies House, and it was stuck there for up to 24 companies.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, Graham. And there are thousands of people in this situation.
Oh dear. And as I see it, it was almost always their home address.
Well, initially, yeah. These companies were often transferred to a central collections address at the same time as the Filipino was appointed, but the previous name and address details stay on the register.
So the net result of this is that thousands of possibly vulnerable UK residents have their name and addresses on Companies House forever. Tens of thousands of Filipinos get paid, well, not very much, but have potential for significant tax liabilities. And frankly, the nameless and faceless individuals who are profiting from the scheme get off scot-free.
Yeah,
well,
no
not,
Scots
not
are
scot-free,
involved.
no. Yep.
No Scots are involved, Graham, as I think
No.
we've established.
I think you're right.
But as you know, we're working fairly hard with Dan to try and uncover more about these schemes and who might be behind them. And this definitely isn't the last time the subject's going to come up.
And given the global scale of tax losses due to schemes like this and others very similar, quite right too.
So, where are we going next, Graham?
A complete change of tack, Ray. We keep mentioning owners of companies either through direct equity stakes or through influence and control, but we haven't ever done an in-depth look at how that works. So that's where we're going next.
I'm looking forward to it.